Task 16 wants us to go ahead and put our cursor here in G19, and it wants us to use the Evaluate Formula tool to figure out what's wrong with this function. So let's go ahead and go to the Formulas tab here at the top. We'll click Evaluate Formula, and if we look at it here, it's subtracting the sum of these cells here with our budget. We can click Evaluate through and see that the reason for the negative number is the one's bigger than the other. If you look at it, you're under budget by, you realize that B4 is our budget and it's subtracting the expenses. What we need to do is just flip this. And so in order to do that, we'll go ahead and delete the formula. We'll do the equal sign. We'll select B4 because that's our total budget. And we're going to go ahead and subtract by B18, which is the total of our expenses. We'll go ahead and click enter. And we're under budget by $371.64. Task 17 wants us to use the VLOOKUP function in N39 to find the bonus for Matthew. So let's put our cursor there in that cell. We'll click Insert Function. We'll type in VLOOKUP. With that selected, we'll click OK. Now our lookup value is N35 here, which puts the Matthew full name here in the table, or in the lookup value. And then for our table array, it's going to be in the Employee Data tab. Now, GMetrix can be kind of finicky. It wants you to select from A3 through this entire table, not A2, which I would have probably selected. So A3 to H98 on the Employee Data tab. Now, before we click Column Index Number, I would encourage you to look up here at the top, because what we're looking for is bonus, which is the fourth column. Because when we click here, it jumps back here. If you click the employee, it's going to start to fill out that sheet name, and you'll have to delete it out. That's a lot said, but really what we want is the number 4 here. And then we want to type in false in the range lookup because we want an exact match. We'll go ahead and click OK. Task 18 wants us to add a linear forecast trend line to the number of employees by year chart. So let's go ahead and select this chart up here, which is the one it wants to add the trend line to. We'll click the plus button over here. You could also click the design tab here at the top with that chart selected. But we'll click the plus, and then we'll click the arrow for trend line. Now notice there's two linears. You have linear and then you have linear forecast. And the second option is what we want. So we'll go ahead and select that. And we'll click off the chart, and it added that for us. Task 19 wants us to fix one of the charts called salary distribution. So let's go ahead and select this chart here. And it just looks a little bit odd here. The problem with this chart is simply that it doesn't select all of the employees, and you can see that by clicking Select Data, and it ends on D21. It shows us what the data is, but really what we want is all of the bonus. So we'll select the entire range, which goes to D98. We'll click OK. Task 20 wants us to go to the yearly charts worksheet, and it wants us to change the January chart to have the style of 4. So with that chart selected, we'll click Design here at the top, and in the Chart Styles group, we're going to look for style 4, which is this one. So we'll go ahead and click it. And then it wants us to save this, so I'll right-click as a template into our GMetrix templates folder. So map to that folder, and we'll call it Time Card Chart. Click Save. Task 21 wants us to use the goal seeking tool to find out with a budget of $15,000 how many people could go on the business trip. So let's go ahead and put our cursor here in B23. We want to go to the formula tab here at the top. My apologies, the data here, data tab at the top. And in the forecast group, we want to click the what if analysis, and we're going to use the goal seek. Now, our set cell is B23, and that's why we put our cursor there first. And what we want to do is the value of 15,000, and by changing B22, so we'll select that cell, we'll click OK. It tells us that 8 people can go. We can click OK. Task 22 wants us to create a scenario called less, and the scenario is if we cut the entertainment budget in half. So let's go to the data tab here at the top. In the forecast group, we're going to click the what if analysis drop down, select Scenario Manager. From here, we'll click Add. We'll type in the name less, and it's by changing C15 because that's the entertainment budget here. So we'll select that cell, and then we're going to click OK. And then in this cell, we want to go from 130 to half, which is 65. We'll click OK. And then what we want to do is actually click create a scenario summary for this. So we'll click summary here and we'll click OK. Task 23 wants us to go ahead and insert some slicers on the employee data pivot chart tab. So let's click here, and then over here up at the top we want to click, because the pivot table is already selected, we'll click analyze, and then the filter group will click insert slicer, and then we'll select full name, salary, and department, and we'll click OK. Task 24 wants us to go ahead and insert a pivot table based upon the information in this table. And so let's go ahead and select the range B3 to J17. And then once we select that range, we'll go to the Insert tab here at the top. We'll click Pivot Table. And from here, we'll go ahead and click Existing Worksheet. And in here, location, we'll go ahead and type in E22. It's weird how they phrase it, and if you're quickly reading, you'll select E23 because it says beneath, but it wants the location to be E22. We'll click OK. And then from here, we just want to go ahead and select invoice and outstanding data, the checkbox. Could also just click and drag them down, and we'll click next. Task 25 wants us to edit a pivot chart, and it's found on the employee data pivot chart worksheet. So let's go ahead and select that tab. Our pivot chart's down here, and it wants us to place the full name, which I'll click and drag to the accesses categories, and then it wants the performance scores to be in the values. So let's go ahead and select performance scores, and I'm just going to drag to the values section. Task 26 wants us to create a pivot table based upon a named range. So to select that range in the name box, I'm just going to click this drop down and select invoices, which is our named range. And then we're going to go to insert a pivot chart. So let's go ahead and pivot table, my apologies. We'll click insert pivot table, and it tells us a new worksheet. And it's real clear at the end of this, just make sure that we do not check that. So make sure that's not checked. We'll click OK. And then here, what we want to do is customer name, we'll make that our row, and then the amount, we'll scroll down, and we'll move that over here. Now, what it does not want the count. It wants the sum. So what we want to do is click this little drop-down arrow, select value field settings, and we want to select sum, and you'll see the numbers change over here. Task 25 wants us to go ahead and create a macro to change the column widths to 25. So let's go ahead and click view here at the top. In the macros group, we'll click the macros drop-down, and we'll select record macro. It tells us that it wants the macro name to be called column widths, one word. Capital C, capital W. It doesn't tell us to change any of the shortcuts. It does make sure to say to save it in this workbook. So with that selected, we'll click OK. Now it's recording us. It doesn't do anything like Word does as far as showing you that it's recording, but you can see down here in the status bar that it is recording. So be careful what you click. We'll click Home here at the top, because what we want to do is change column widths to be 25. So we're in the cells format column width. We'll type in 25 and click OK. And then our macro is still recording, so we want to go to the View tab here at the top. We'll click the Macros drop down and click Stop Recording. And it tells us that it wants all of the columns to be 25. So let's click this space between 1 and A. We're on the View tab, Macros drop down. We'll click View Macros, and we'll select Run after we click column width. They're trying to get you with the that not being the first one. So select column width, then click Run. Task 28 wants us to assign a macro to this button. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and right-click this button, and we'll click Assign Macro. And what we want is to change color. So we'll click that, and we'll click OK. We'll click off the button because it wants us to run the macro as well. So we'll go ahead and select that now. Notice the change at the top. Task 29 wants us to go ahead and create a spin button in F8 and F9. So we want to go to the Developer tab. If you do not have the Developer tab, make sure you right-click up here to select Customize the ribbon and check the Developer box and click OK. That'll give you the Developer tab here at the top. We're going to select Developer again. We're in the Controls group, Insert drop-down, and what we want is the Spin button form control. And it tells us that it wants it in F8 to F9. So we'll go ahead and draw that. Now it wants us to add some things to it. So let's right-click the button. we're going to go ahead and format the control, and our minimum value, say 1 to 100. The change is going to be by 1, and our cell link is going to be F7, and we'll click OK. Task 30 wants us to edit the form control on the dashboard worksheet. So it's right here. It's right above the employee information. And what we want to do is actually just right-click that form control, and we'll click Format the Control. And our input range is going to be on the Employee Data tab, and it's all of these names here. So from A3 to A98. And our cell link is going to be P34 per the instructions. Click the drop down, and we'll click OK.